got something to add to that. It goes back to your point about the board members always wanting to switch and save money and save postage. And if you go back to that chart, a year ago, let's say in July of '08, what we were finding is that we were getting an opportunity to email the people who were also direct mail donors.
Right.
And there was a lot of pressure a year ago or on that timeline to try to, quote, convert them to be online donors, to get them out of the direct mail stream.
We want to tell them how to behave, yes.
Yes,
Good
we want
idea.
to push on a road. And what was happening is we were inviting all these people to give online, and the email response was terrible. And then what we started to realize is that a lot of these donors would mail in their check after they got an email. And then we put two and two together and we said, well, why don't the emails include a copy of the reply device that they're getting in the mail?
Right.
And then what you have here, it kind of, we found to be reversed. We ended up having, a year later, a huge surge in the combined rate of response because we stopped asking people to become online donors because they didn't want to do it. Their comfort zone was to write a check and mail it in.
Right.
And then when we gave them another reply slip, it was like, duh, why didn't we think of this a year ago?
That's great.
And I suspect that you're going to have that because when you had that graph on age,
Right.
a lot of people that are older have email addresses and will read your email because they trust you,
Right.
but they won't go online. They'll still write the check and mail it in because they've been doing it their whole life.
Right.
And so it took a year for us to figure out, stop trying to make people do what they don't want to do and let them do what they do want to do.
Well, and what we're finding, I mean, it used to be we would say, if they came in online, then you renew them online. If they came in, in the mail, then you renew them in the mail. Now we're finding like, let them do whatever they want to do. If they want to give
That's
online
a
this
good
month
point,
and
yeah.
give in the mail next month, fine with me.
Right.
So give them all the options and
Right.
let them choose.
Right.
Because we can't, we
We're
all
not
want-
thinking for them anymore. We're
Don't
letting them
think for them,
decide.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean those multi-channel donors definitely are are really your prime donor that you want to cultivate because those people are giving and those people who are giving in both channels are your most rewarded. They give the highest average gift. They have the highest response rate, and that's across all of our clients that we've seen in the industry statistics have reflected that. Is that they're just your best donor. You got a question?
Yeah, this might be off topic a little bit, but I guess just thinking about contacting donors through multiple channels, how much is too much? Because obviously, we all have the case where you make a donation and you just get inundated with so many communications from a particular nonprofit that you just opt out of the emails,
Right.
you throw away, or you recycle the appeals, whatever. So have you seen any percentages on like the frequency of asks versus the response rate, or do you have any advice? And obviously we're all intelligent, so we would hope not to do that, but still,
Right.
like that would be a concern.
Well, Kathy can speak more to the direct mail side of things, but it's been my understanding that in the offline world, you kind of have to ask for money in order to get money, and it's
Yeah,
sort of, you
absolutely.
keep asking until you
Yeah,
start
but
seeing
it's
it
one
fall
thing
off.
versus sending an appeal every couple months versus getting 3 emails a week, which has
Right.
happened from Zoom organizations.
Well, and that's the thing is that for offline it really is completely different in
Yeah.
terms of that delicate balance because people can, like you said, they can recycle them, they can burn them, they can do whatever they want, but the point is that they're still going to get mail.
Yeah.
And for online,
They can leave.
They can leave,
They can
and they,
walk away.
that step to unsubscribe is so quick. With can spam laws being what they are, it has to be within two clicks of an email that you can unsubscribe. And so you're online, we're always very cautious about losing those people because it can be expensive to acquire them from whatever channel, and we'll talk about kind of moving people or getting people's email addresses from offline donors. But once you've got them, doesn't mean that you've just got them, and now you can keep working with them. And so we find generally, and we recommend for all of our clients that that balance online for the amount of communications that they're getting is smaller. It's fewer communications because it's certainly not communications that involve asks all the time. One of the beauties of the online realm is that you can send something out that doesn't need to have a reply device, right? You don't have, like a newsletter, you could have like a soft donation ask in it, but it's really intended to be a donor cultivation component, right? It's one of those things
And
where
they have a higher expectation that you ask less online.
Right, and you can, because offline, the only way that it really works from a financial standpoint is that when you send a piece out, it has to have a reply device, otherwise you're spending all this money on just sending out direct mail. It needs to have something where people can give to it. So even like a newsletter offline would include, a reply envelope and a, VRE and everything. And so online with the newsletter, it can be just a cultivation thing. If it's just a weekly email or a monthly email, then it just includes some information. We work with City Meals on Wheels here in the city, and they do a monthly recipe email that goes out to people who have opted into that email. And so people who are getting a monthly email that's just a recipe, doesn't have a donation ask in it, but just something in there, a link to donate at the footer, and people donate from time to time, but the point is that there's no expectation that that group is going to be donating to every single email that you send out. But the point is that that group has grown and you cultivate them, and then at certain times of year you can ask for money. And so you can be a bit more varied in the types of communication online.
On the offline side, I will say, having been in the fundraising business for a little bit longer years than David, I would say across the board, most smaller organizations mail too little, not too much, and leave money on the table. And also part of that is because of the expense of doing the mailing, but because you're trying to mail to everybody on your list, which everybody on your list is not even a donor. So my advice, my number one piece of advice for smaller organizations in direct mail is mail more often to the people who are giving. And once or twice a year to that larger pool who you might get a gift from. Because too many groups are saying, well, we mail in the spring and we mail at year end. You're leaving an awful lot of money on the table by only mailing a couple times a year. And your best donors, they want to hear from you more. So I would say it's actually, you can stand to go heavier.
So just to kind of reinforce, just reaching audience in multiple channels, that's the goal. So how do we do this? You mentioned trying to bring those offline donors online, and as Jack pointed out, it's not moving them online, but getting their email address or being able to communicate with them in another channel so that their overall giving increases and their overall participation increases. So how many people are already email appending their direct mail file? About half.
What do you mean?
Well, basically it's a very good question. So basically trying to acquire email addresses from your offline donor pool by sending it out to a vendor, and there are a lot of vendors out there that will basically take your file and match it against known email addresses for that person's name and their mailing address. And usually we find between a 15 to 20% total match rate for email addresses. So you get about, if you put in like 10,000, if you've got 10,000 donors offline, you'll expect to get out about 15 to 20% email addresses at the end of the process. And so those are people who they've matched the email, they get sent an email where they can opt out of communications, and then at the end of the process, it takes about 2 weeks, you get their email address at the end. So
If they opt in.
So essentially,
So of the 15 to 20%, is that the ones that opt in?
yeah, those are the people who have the usable email addresses.
Okay.
And the nice thing is that you only pay on the ones that you get. So it's not based. Pricing is based on input, but you only pay for what you get output. So if it was 10,000 donors and you only got 500 donors out of 500 email addresses out of that, you'd only pay for 500. But we've generally found between 15 and 20% match rate in total. But it's a great way to reactivate lapsed donors, because there are a lot of people, and again, this is mostly for not the really tiny organizations, because I agree with you that a lot of small organizations are not mailing enough and mailing everybody. But for any really small nonprofit organization that does segmentation offline and only mails to certain segments at various times of year, there's going to be a pool, and generally a fairly significant pool, of people who have lapsed, who haven't given in the last 3 years, that aren't considered active donors, and so they might not get mail all the time. They might just go back into the acquisition stream at some point, or they might just get only mailings from time to time. So the goal is that if you are able to append their email addresses and get them in another channel, that there's a way to reactivate them, since it is cheaper to do it, and so you can reactivate them. So we found great success in doing that. It's another way to coordinate messaging with your active donors. I mean, when we started doing email appending 6 years ago, it was all to lapsed, to try to reactivate those lapsed donors. But nowadays, over the last few years, we're doing active donor appends as well because of the coordination of content that you can do and that we'll show examples of between both channels. And the one cool thing that we've just been able to start doing over the last 6 to 9 months has been some overlaying of data onto the lists where the vendor
This is the same vendor
that does the
Okay.
append can overlay basic demographic information about the constituent, and so it's almost like some mini donor profiling. And some of the vendors include a few of these selects included in whatever the price you're paying for the append, and they've got like 400 that you can choose from. But things like age, income, and like the number of children in the household, those types of pieces of information are popular to be able to append now.
Am I understanding this correctly? There is a middleman or third-party agency that you can go through to track these people's emails by their name or whatever information you provide them with?
Yeah, it's basically all the vendors, no matter, Equifax is one of them, Experian is one of them, these are all credit card companies. Because basically what they're doing is they're matching information that their existing email addresses linked to a credit card account, and so that's how they're getting the email addresses. And so there are hundreds of millions of email addresses out there as a result of when you sign up for a credit card and you provide all this information. If you're not opting out of that piece when you sign up for the credit card, that information is exchangeable. And
But
it only
the
works
really
for-
important thing though is they don't just give you that.
Right.
You ask them to find emails that match you, and then they send an email asking permission from that person to opt in to getting emails from your organization. So they have to opt in
Right.
before you can start emailing.
And it only works with your donors. You have to have a relationship, a financial relationship with somebody in order to be able to run the append. So these people who are your constituents, it's just a matter of what you're just kind of trying to communicate with them in another channel. And so that's how it's legal.
And so you're providing them with a list of those donors then? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, all it requires is the list of a full address information and then first and last name. And again, the creative of the email that you're going to send out. So this is an example email that we do for City Meals, where it's a piece of copy at the top, talking to people about the fact that we'd like to communicate with you online. We'd like to include the most recent version of the newsletter so they can be like, hey, this is what we would like to be sending you on a regular basis. It's always a good strategy to consider. And again, it's about 15 to 20%. It's really a great way of
So this is the email that you're having the vendor send out?
Yep.
You actually created?
Yep, yeah. I mean, the vendor, I think that, depending on the vendor, I think that most vendors require that you have some sort of creative that you put together. There's some standard language that needs to be included generally in these things so that you're satisfying all the legalities of the fact that this email is going out and that they're sending it. But the vendor does all the email sending because you don't have their list. You don't have access to the list until they've supplied it.
Do you have to do this over and over because isn't there a lot of turnover?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not something that you just do it once and you. We've got a few spots if you're. You don't just do it once. We generally do it yearly for organizations because again, if we consider okay, we're going to do a lapsed append for lapsed donors this week. Well, and if we're saying that anybody who hasn't given within the last 36 months is considered lapsed, okay, well, 6 months from now, that's a different group of people. And so we generally recommend a yearly append, where we're basically appending certain constituency segments all the time, because there are always going to be people coming in and out. The other thing is that because of that match rate, there are email addresses that will come into the system and rotate off.